Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. So today we have Max here as our seminar speaker. Max is an associate professor at the University of Nottingham, and he leads the brain and data group, and which focus on mental workload and other cognitive activities as a personal information to evaluate technology and work tasks. So today, Max will give us a talk titled Brain Data as Cognitive Personal Informatics. So now, time for Max.
Thank you very much. I think I've got. So thank you very much for having me. Come on in, or I haven't really started yet. I'll grab some chairs. You confidently lifted those chairs and then went for it anyway. Yeah, so I appreciate you having me here to talk. It's very kind of you. I'm excited to talk a bit about our research focus. Sorry, noisy chairs for those online. Do you need more chairs, or are we? We've got benches around. Cool. Awesome. So I'm very excited to talk about our research area, and what one of the things we're currently focused on is this kind of angle, particularly on cognitive personal informatics. So I'm going to talk a bit about what I mean by that, and I'm going to present two of our research papers kind of combined. I've forgotten, how long am I supposed to talk for? 45, okay, that's good. It's not more than an hour, so we'll see. So there's a couple of papers that I'll talk a bit about as we go along, and then talk about how you can get involved as well if you want to find out more. So this is our research team that we have at the moment, which I think is the majority of people. And the work that I'm going to present today is particularly led by Serena, who's just finishing her PhD soon. And she's led this idea on looking at mental workload as a topic from the personal informatics perspective. And then other people, we have some machine learning experts, some VR people, some human factors people. So as a mixture, we look at the idea of taking data from our brain as like something we've measured, and then using that to either evaluate software or to maybe build something interactive. But most of the time, we're looking more at an evaluation side. So one of the things that motivates us is that consumer neurotechnology is actually kind of already here now, and it's not very good yet. I apologize if someone watching has built some of this consumer technology and selling it, but you can buy these things for like £200 or £1,000. They're designed to be for you to have at home. They're designed to help you either work harder or smarter, or to meditate or relax. But you can buy these things just for yourself at home and use them whenever you fancy. And they are kind of technically available, and I don't think they're especially very accurate in what they do. Certainly when we use something like this in our research, a lot of the feedback we get is this is not scientific data. This is consumer grade data that's not necessarily very accurate, but it's still interesting to look at. And also we would say that it's not just stuff that we're wearing on our head that is beginning to tell us about cognitive activity. So your watch now might be telling you, oh, you should consider taking a break. And so you start getting the notifications. And has anybody tried this Spire Stone as a device before? It's called the Spire Stone. And it was a device you could buy for like $100, and you wear it on your wrist, your waistband here, or on your clothing, and it would measure your breathing rate. And then it would tell you when you're stressed, which is fine, except that it would beep every minute and say, you're stressed right now, you should take a break. I was like, well, I know, but I've got to give this lecture for the whole hour, so I can't take a break for this 1 minute. So it was kind of classifying that you were stressed based on your breathing level. The ways that it was inaccurate was that if you were leaning against the table while washing up, your breathing would reduce because you were leaning against a surface. And then that would say you're stressed. I'm like, well, no, I'm really just washing up. So these are interesting devices, but you have to play with them and know what they're really saying, whether that matters right now, which is a topic I'll get into as well. So all of this technology we have at the moment is kind of, at the moment, trying to say something about you right now when you're using it. So it either says you're stressed right now, like that little device, or it says, why don't you use this app for 15 minutes, wear the brain scanner, and we'll meditate for 15 minutes, and I'll tell you if you're meditating successfully. So you're kind of mostly trying to, I don't know, it's trying to make a current judgment why you choose to use it as like a task you're doing. And I'm going to meditate now, and I'm going to use a brain device to use it. We're not really at the point yet where we have anything we wear that will track us all day or all week or all year, like our watches do with physical activity. So we're a bit interested in what will happen next. Do you want to grab another set of chairs? No worries. I appreciate so many people coming. This is very exciting. We're also quite interested by the fact that neurotechnology is beginning to appear at work. So I grabbed DALI Mini for this to make some pictures of brain scanners at work, because it's kind of funny. But in practice, there's news articles of companies who are putting little EEG chips inside helmets for employees, and then measuring their employees and saying, you should take a break now. You've worked too hard for too long, take a break. And so it's a bit scary that there's companies beginning to take brain data from their employees as part of the practice to normal. And one company reported millions of pounds of profit from improving their workforce from having scanned their brains every day while they work. So there's some scary ethics questions, I think, in this area. Also, we're motivated by the fact that people are quite interested in doing this. Normally from a mental health perspective, people say, oh, I want to track myself so I can improve my mental health, or I can reduce my stress. And so this device, which actually I don't think it's come to market yet, but it's been advertised for a while as coming soon, is something that tracks your emotions, says whether you're happy or sad or angry or joyful, which again is quite a different concept to stressed or having high mental effort right now. But people want, in theory, there's a market for devices that will tell you about your mental health, and they believe the risk stuff will do it. It's places where we are seeing success, and I thank Anna for showing me some of these things. It's like the Garmin app. Does anyone have the Garmin app apart from Anna? This is a view that Garmin will show you right now, which is your stress level throughout the day. And then it's got things like exercised on it. But this yellow or dark orange here is like medium time mental workload, not mental workload, stress levels. And then here is where you're resting in blue. So the watch is taking some data about you and saying you're stressed and you should relax. It's trying to tell you that. And Anna's she's told me examples of what she's thought about that data. And it's interesting to try and figure out what it really means for you. And then the welltory app is interesting. If you sign up to the welltory app and then give it access to lots of your devices, like your watch, your activity, your exercises, it will do things like give you a display there saying you're 25% stressed, 90% energetic, and 68% healthy. And then sometimes I get those and it's like, you're 90% stressed right now, you should take a break. I'm always looking at it going, what does that mean? Like, what data did it get? Most of the time it's heart rate variability from my watch, but it's still interesting that it's tried to make some assumptions. At the same time, it's also telling me that stress is good sometimes, and I'll get onto that a bit more later, but it is giving me notifications to help me understand it more. And one challenge is that we don't really understand it. For a start, this is something I'm going to suggest right now, and many of you, I'm happy for you to disagree with me. In fact, I'd love to chat to you if you disagree with me with this. But I would say the literature is currently mixing up 3 different types of stress all the time in what it's saying. So there's stress as a mental health condition, that people have stress and they want to recover from it. There's a lot of literature on that, obviously, as a healthcare thing. There's feeling stressed about things, which is kind of like an emotional response to a situation where you want to avoid being stressed out by your work. It's not necessarily that your body is under stress, but you feel anxious or stressed about what you have to do. There's lots of literature about that. And then there's also the body being under stress, which is what it can detect from your heart changes and your breathing changes. One of the challenges is that this is always bad and people are motivated by it, but this can be a good thing. Like if you're going to do something challenging like climb a mountain, you need that physical stress on your body to achieve it, and you can't achieve it without choosing to voluntarily go into a body stressing situation. And you feel good because you did it, you exercised, you had an achievement, but you need to be able to enter your body into a physiologically stressed situation to achieve that. And that's true with mental workload as well, and doing cognitive activity. So the bad thing is that this is what people are motivated to track. They want to track their stress to avoid stress at work, to lead a less stressful lifestyle. But actually what we can measure is the body being under stress, which isn't necessarily bad. You might feel bad about it, which would be bad, but you may feel good about having worked hard and achieved something good. So I would argue, one of my assertions that we put in our literature, well, in our papers and grant proposal at the moment, is that lots of people are measuring this, saying they can measure this, but they can't necessarily. And people want to do this, but get this data and don't know what it means. So it's for me, a massive confusing area that needs the next 5-10 years to be figured out by people in terms of what it means to individuals. The other thing I would argue is that for every paper that says we've measured stress using blood oxygen, or we've measured stress using heart rates, there's another paper that says we have measured high mental workload using blood oxygen, or we've measured mental workload through heart rate or skin changes. And I would argue that a lot of the time when they're measuring the body being under stress, as in the good type maybe, they have just done the same thing that all the papers are trying to do when they say mental workload or high attention, and that there's a point where you're focusing, working hard, and there's all sorts of physiological changes in your body that change when that happens, and you can detect those using different technologies. But they all have this perspective that it's bad to be high. So they all say, oh, you know, people have got high mental workload doing this task. We need to change the task so they can do it with low mental workload or low stress levels. And again, this is a default assumption that high stress, as that is measured, is a bad thing. But people have high attention levels and high mental workload and maybe high stress while they're gaming. And this is a good thing that they enjoy. They choose to do that in the evening. They go and enter a game, which is difficult and challenging, and then they feel happy and relaxed afterwards. Maybe not everyone does that, but some people relax that way. So a big load of mess of all these papers saying we can measure this, probably measuring the same type of thing, but calling it different words. And so another big challenge for research is to establish how many of these are overlapping or related. In our research, we use mental workload kind of consistently. We try to avoid saying stress wherever possible, even though I've said it quite a lot so far in this presentation. All of our papers say mental workload. And the reason we do this in particular is a few reasons. One is that I see mental workload as being kind of emotionally agnostic. Like stress, when people say high stress, they immediately associate that as a bad thing. But when we say high mental workload in a task, I feel like less of the time people assume that's bad, but not all the time. And Anna disagreed with me when I said it was emotionally agnostic. But compared to stress, which I think is very loaded, mental workload is a term which is scientifically validated through lots of different areas, which is, you know, it's just like a description of whether workload is high or low. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's got a really strong scientific basis. So there's papers from the 80s by Wickens about multiple resource theory and attention, which all underlying the kind of thing that's happened in human factors and engineering to look at mental workload levels, which has been tested in all sorts of conditions, used to evaluate air traffic controllers or other hard tasks, and has been empirically demonstrated to be an accurate or, you know, real thing that we can measure. And then things like the TLX scale, how many people have used that or seen that in papers? It's kind of like a thing that every HCI paper says. So we wanted to measure mental workload, so we use TLX, which was based on all of this kind of foundation of mental workloads and human factors, where your cognitive activity is one of 6 or a couple of 6 different factors. And for me, I see this as a very good parallel to physical activity or physical workload. I can say mental workload and physical workload, or physical activity, mental activity, and they can be drawn more as a parallel than if I use words like stress. So then, given all that, lately we've been asking what are the real HCI questions for all this. Like I see one of the interesting questions being, what is stress? What is mental workload? And that's maybe an HCI / maybe psychology type task. I would say that classifying the state of someone's cognitive activity right now using physiological data is becoming a machine learning problem, which is great. We have machine learning HCI people. We have lots of machine learning people working on these types of devices in industry as well. And I think it's going to be those people that will solve the challenge of, can you tell whether someone's high mental workload while they're doing a task? And so I've sort of started moving away from doing that in our studies, not entirely because we're interested in it still, but for me, the interesting questions become, okay, when we can do that, what goals will people have? Do people feel like it's good or bad to have high mental workloads? What do companies think about their employees if they have high or low mental workloads? Will it be socially acceptable for companies to take mental workload data about people? Do people feel super sensitive about it compared to other types of activity like physical activity? There's been lots of research about like companies taking your exercise data from you and then using that to adjust your insurance costs. So if they suddenly start getting that type of data in our lives and it's cognitive activity instead, what will that do and how will people feel about it? For me, these are all the interesting questions, and this is a kind of cognitive personal informatics type research area, which is why I've started using as much as possible to describe it. So to answer some of these, Serena and well, me working with someone from human factors and engineering at our university, which is Sarah Sharples, have all been looking at kind of people's everyday lives and how they understand mental workload and how they describe their everyday life using mental workload terms. And do they now have new things that they understand about themselves when they start to think that way? So Serena was led with 3 particular questions, and this is work mainly led by Serena. So when I start saying we did this, really, I mean, Serena was an amazing researcher and went out there and did these interviews and these studies. But we wanted to know how people really understand mental workloads. So we can sort of give them a sense of what it is, then ask them to track it for a while. How do they really describe their life that way, or how do they interpret it? So that's kind of like a conceptual level question. What impact does different mental workload situations have on their lives, their day-to-day living, and how they felt about it? So sort of understand impact of mental workload. And then what goals they had for themselves now they've thought about it. So did they want to, when they thought about these other 2 things, did they want to start adjusting their work patterns, their work-life balance in order to manage it differently? So she ran a study, which was 20 people, it was 19 in the end, but 20 people took part. And we asked them every day for a week, every half an hour, to track or to self-judge their mental workload level. So an app which Horia built, in fact, Horia's sat over there, would beep every 30 minutes and say, hey, please tell us your current mental workload level, what your mental workload level was like for the last half an hour, and what things you were doing in that half an hour. So we could look at that data as well if we wanted. And then when it got to the evenings, it would do it every 1 hour until a point where they would say, I want to stop for the day because I'm going to bed soon. And then it would stop until the next morning. But then after they'd done that for a week, Serena processed their data a little bit and presented it back to them in a 2-hour interview, 1 to 2 hour interview, which is the main qualitative data that we got. And then she did an interpretive phenomenological analysis of it, which is a version of qualitative analysis. Has anyone heard of IPA? Some people. For us, it's interesting because it adds a bit more emphasis on novel experiences that individuals had rather than looking for consensus amongst participants. You put a bit more emphasis on a real situation that only one person had, and that could be a valuable bit of insight into data. But in terms of process, it's a lot like doing Braun and Clark's thematic analysis, but with a different interpretive emphasis. So this was a bit more of the app. I guess I've said this now, but this is the type of graph that Serena produced from all of their ratings across the day. So they could go back in the interview and look at this and say, okay, what were you doing here on that day? We should talk about that. Why did you give it a 5? And this rating scale 1 to 5 was based on something called ISA. What's that stand for, Horia? Instantaneous self-assessment, or instantaneous subjective assessment. One of those. Anyway, it's got like a standard scale used in industry, and 5 means, oh my goodness, I'm failing my work because I'm so overloaded right now, and 1 means, you know, I'm barely conscious and I could be doing something useful. So it's kind of interesting for us to see that a lot of the data was in this 2 to 4, where they didn't often feel confident saying it was a 5, but they were out of control. And so most of it was in this middle range. Then in the evening, we also asked them to fill out a diary about how much sleep they'd had, what their mood was like, what their stress levels were like. So try and separate it out from mental workload. And we sort of also brought that back in for conversation when we needed to. So the interviews, like I said, were a couple of hours and typically through Zoom and Teams because it was during COVID when this happened. But we asked them particularly these 4 topics. We went through 4 topics: their personal experiences, their conceptualization of mental workloads, what questions they had about their own lifestyle from it, and what ethical, legal, moral questions they had as a kind of starting point for us to look at ethical questions. The people that took part were essentially all office workers who had Android phones because it was an Android app that was doing it. We also asked for people with no clinical mental health history because we didn't want to do anything during the study that raised feelings about themselves that might exacerbate mental health. So we asked people who didn't have that. It was originally 10 researchers and 10 people from industry. One of the researchers we excluded after it was evident from the interview and the data that they had misunderstood what to do in the study. And then people received £75 for taking part, £25 if they gave us lots of data, which they all did. So they all got £100 in the end for taking part. So it's quite invasive. Every half hour for a week of reporting to an app was quite a big commitment for people. So we appreciated their time a lot for that. the results I'm going to present are 7 themes in total from our qualitative analysis, 4 which are in our Chi paper and 3 which are in our recent FAccT paper on the ethics side. So I'll, and if you want to know more about each of the themes I present, the papers have got a lot more quotes in it. And if there's time, I can show you some quotes at the end, but I've sort of not shown you the raw data in this presentation for time purposes. So the 4 main themes about mental workload that came up were general perceptions, which is just kind of a conceptualization level, things that affected that perception, which was we took out as a separate theme to be more about like adjustments to a standard perspective. The mental workload cycle, which we would say is our main contribution from the work, which I'll show you. And then what things affected people's ability to manage their own cycle as the 4th theme. So in terms of general perceptions, it was nice to get from the interviews the positive and the negative from people. And this, we kind of had hypotheses that this was a good thing to have high mental workload, where people really described fulfillment and enjoyment and feeling less distracted and stimulated by interesting tasks. And they reported this as being times when they rated it high mental workload and then described this as good things they were doing during the day. Some people, they described high rating times as being under pressure, under stress. So it's quite hard to stop people talking about stress because typically when they had negative response to high mental workload, it was a feeling of stress, that second type I presented earlier, that they felt bad about. So there was this balance between doing something and feeling great about it and doing something and feeling stressed and upset about it. At the low end, people were like, oh yeah, low mental workload, this is great. I use this as like a reward. This is manageable. I can relax now for a bit. And then people were saying bad things about it, like they were bored. They wanted to do something, couldn't think of what to do. They wanted to take some activity up that would be a bit more engaging, but didn't have something. During COVID, we had a few people describe being under like having to being furloughed because of COVID at that point. And so they were unable to do their jobs and were feeling distressed about that. And then in the middle, we had this point where they sort of said medium seems good because it's not overloading and it's not underloading. It's maybe a sustainable sweet spot. And people didn't really describe much negative about being medium other than it wasn't high, if that makes sense. Like they sometimes thought maybe going to high could be good, but they didn't specify anything particularly negative with it. We found 4 things that affected that perception. So this are the things that change it. So the outcome was really affecting their response to whether it was a successful high mental workload session. Like if they were working really hard all day and they weren't getting to a point where they were going to solve a task and they felt like that was a bad thing, then not getting a good outcome at the end flipped it from being a good high mental workload period to a bad mental workload period. Feeling pressure. So if they realized it was like a deadline and they were having to work hard in order to meet the deadline, and that was like an expectation upon them, then that flipped it from being a good activity that they felt like they were in control of to a high mental work activity they were not in control of and just had to do regardless of how they felt. But the location affected how they described it. So this is mostly due to low mental workloads. Like they felt anxiety or felt bad if they had low mental workload at work, like they were expected to have high mental workload at work and do something, useful at work rather than sit around and relax. And so when they had low mental workload at work, they were describing that type of thing as having a negative outcome at the end of it, or negative feeling at the end. And then the inherent enjoyment of the task. So if it's really a boring task and high mental workloads, not great. But if it was something they enjoyed doing, like if people enjoy teaching, for example, then they had this inherent influence on whether doing that high activity is good or bad for a period. So those were just useful in our paper to be able to map out kind of all the perspectives that people were reporting and what was affecting it. Then the main mental workload cycle that we extracted was just this view on how people moved between these different levels throughout the day, and this being what led to healthy feelings or happy feelings afterwards. So people were essentially reporting that if they were able to move between different levels of mental workload at different times, when they felt it was needed and they had some sort of control and agency over that, that was when they felt best. Like these green arrows are positive transitions for people. And the reason we got a double bump on the left there is because sometimes people exactly described that they were kind of moving up stages to get to a high mental workload level, and that was what was positive. But then being from medium, it could be good to go higher or lower. But interestingly, from high, people typically took a big jump down to a low mental workload break afterwards, rather than seeking kind of medium in between. And then the thing that was bad was being stuck in any of those situations. So if you were stuck for a whole day, required to be in a high mental workload period for a whole day, this is what led to burnout, fatigue, resentment, reduced performance, and feeling like you were stressed afterwards. And same with being stuck at low mental workload, interestingly. People, if they didn't have anything they could do or being required to do something that was very boring for a long period, this would lead to negative effects if they didn't have the opportunity to do something more challenging and interesting. The negative part of being in medium just sort of was less extreme and just led to, not being incredibly exciting, but wasn't as bad as being stuck in the upper or lower levels. So for us, this is quite interesting, and I'll get a bit more in this discussion, but it means that it's good that like every level has this purpose and should be recognized as having this purpose. And that's the next slide, actually. But it's not that high is bad, it's being stuck in a situation that's bad, and that the healthy cycle is what we need in order to have a manageable mental workload level throughout the day. In terms of the purpose, we need to have this cycle and all parts of the cycle in there so that we can achieve these different purposes in our life in each day. So you need to have the rest and recovery, you need to have the rewards or the preparation. These were the ways that low mental workload was used to feel better. And then you need to have the high in order to achieve difficult tasks or to get that sense of reward from doing something challenging. And then you needed medium sometimes just to be able to get through lots of stuff that wasn't necessarily overloading, but would allow you to achieve lots. And I think this is a challenge for research going forward in our area because we're still stuck in this high stress, bad frame with point of view. I'll discuss this more in a bit. So then what stopped people? We found three main factors. And although it seems like life could be considered external, there was kind of like enough of a distinction for us in the data for us to draw them out as separate sub-themes. So life factors were kind of things that were happening, so it still sounds a bit like external factors, but things that were currently going on in people's lives that were having a sustaining effect on their ability to move up and down between levels. So like being unwell with like a long-term medical condition meant that they were constantly worried about stuff and they were never really feeling like they were in a low situation. They were always, if they were not doing work, worried about something else. And so this life factors about what's currently happening or what you're currently doing was affecting people's ability to healthily move between the levels. The internal factors were interesting because this is when people were saying, well, I can't help but ruminate about something. And I guess rumination is a term that lots of people have discussed. But if people are there at night and they're worried about something and they keep thinking about it and they're struggling to stop themselves doing it, and they're getting kind of locked into a situation where they are at a point where they should be low mental workload, but actually spending a lot of time thinking hard about something and worrying about it. Then external factors were things like just logistics of days, circumstances like having to meet a deadline at a certain time means that you just haven't got time to take a break. So it's just kind of like a practical procedural aspect of what's going on that will stop you from taking that break you feel like you need. So those are the four themes for us understanding mental workloads in terms of our everyday living. The next three themes from our FAccT paper, the Fairness, Accountability and Trust Conference paper, were on the ethics side. And this was us looking at mostly about the negative things people felt about mental workload in general and what worries they had and what this might do for, because we're quite worried as a team actually that we're helping to build technology that people will be used against people unfairly or unethically. We're designing things that will let you measure mental workload at work so that your company knows that you're currently slacking off, for example, and not doing your job properly. And we're quite worried about reaching that situation. So we started to ask this type of question for people. So the three themes mostly about fear and then consequences and then just their approach to sharing or thoughts about sharing of data. So in terms of fear, there was like three levels of this, of what things they were worried about. One was personal judgment. The other was what consequence it might have. And then the third was that it was just misinterpreted or misunderstood or inaccurate. And those were three separate, distinct issues that people were worried about. The personal judgment side was interesting because it was a mixture of both interpersonal with people they knew and also things like work or what employers might think if they started to look at this data, or if it was considered in your job interviews. Whether or not people would judge you as not being able to cope with something if you had high mental workload for something they thought should be easy for you to accommodate. So that personal judgment based on the data was a concern. The consequences in the workplace were kind of like having bad annual performance reviews because what your personal data says about you. Whether it gets exploited by a company in terms of the workforce being made to work longer hours or different hours, or some sort of use the data against you, or being offered different salaries at job interviews or getting different job opportunities because of it. These are all kind of consequences of people using that data against you. And then the inaccurate judgment was a mixture between validity and people having the knowledge and understanding to be able to interpret it correctly. So even if it was accurate, the measurements, if someone says, oh, that should be high because I believe everyone should be high mental workload at work, is that really an accurate reflection of what your mental workload should have been, or is it just what the boss assumes must be the case and is maybe not true? Because it's quite a complex, like cognitive, I don't know, what's the right word for it? It's a complex concept with lots of aspects to it that isn't really understood yet. So if people start making drastic or default assumptions that aren't very accurate, and this could start to lead to misinterpretation. And people were worried that they would get misunderstood. And I think the most obvious example of that is people who are saying, if I'm good at my job and I can do my job well and I can do my job easily, what should my mental workload level be? Should it be low because I can do it easily, or should it be high because it's a difficult task and I can achieve it? I think that difference of opinion on what an employee should be like in a workplace is quite interesting. In terms of the negative effects, there was a kind of a tandem dual bit there between whether people felt like they were being controlled by data they were looking at, and also whether or not it was having a negative effect loop on them. Slightly different things. The being controlled by was people worried that they would start saying, okay, well, the app says I need to take a break now, I should take a break. And if the data is inaccurate or just suggesting a break, but you trust it as something you should do, and then you don't achieve something, then people are worried about being led by data that maybe isn't the best thing for them. It's just one aspect of data for them. The negative states being exacerbated is kind of a cycle where if the app is saying you're unhealthy or you're stressed, and people start to say, well, yeah, maybe I'm not very good right now. Maybe I'm in a bad state. And that's maybe, a loop that goes round and round for people. So what should an app really tell you is a question in order to help you rather than harm you. So then the third theme was this view on sharing, which for us was really interesting because it was the complete spectrum. We had people all ends of it who were like, yeah, sure, I'll give my brain data to everybody. Insurance companies, why not? It's quite interesting. And other people were like, oh no, the other way around. Other people down there were like, I'm not even going to let my parents know this type of data about me because, they feel like I should be working hard at university, was some of the students saying. So they were, very restrictive, even people that they trusted as close family members, seeing it as being very personal, very introspective, very invasive as a type of data. But yeah, some people, and actually I'm more like this end, I'm more like, well, it's just another type of data that nobody really cares about me. So I'd happily kind of collect it and probably tweet about it, knowing me. So what does this all mean for us? What is it doing for our research group? And what might it involve you in if you want to get involved? Because I know lots of you are on digital health, which is really exciting. So I'd love to talk to you more about this afterwards. For me, it highlighted there's this massive difference between physical activity goals that we know quite well. So like doing 10,000 steps a day or exercising more. And then cognitive activity goals we might have, which is actually to balance things, to have a mixture, to have like a clear set of stages you go throughout a day that means you get the most out of low and the most out of medium, the most out of high. So that difference between a perceived complexity of just more exercise is good to actually a careful balance is good for cognitive activity. The ideal mental workload cycle is going to be challenging for people, quite hard to specify because there are some people who want to do more cognitive activity. We've been talking to the retired people a little bit, and they want to do more activity because they are retired. They're kind of living now a more relaxed sedentary lifestyle. And actually they want to do something every day that gets them cognitively active to be more, I don't know, engaged with something. And so there's people who take courses when they're retired in order to increase their cognitive activity or just do things like mind games or Sudokus all the time. So those people are trying to do this thing that the activity is, which is just, I should do more to be healthier. But there's people like me and probably like many of you who are like, I've got 7 hours at work. I've got these 12 things to achieve. I could probably fit in a 4-minute lunch break if I do that at 1 o'clock. And we're trying to maximize the amount we can get out of a day while still feeling healthy at the end, hopefully. And so being able to parameterize a cycle for people to say, what would be good? What do I want? It's going to be quite a hard thing to articulate if it's such a complex aim. And so as part of that, we're wondering what the future is going to be like when this is something we can easily measure about ourselves. What are people going to say that's like the equivalent of everybody should do 10,000 steps a day? Like, what will the motto be for activity? We're hoping at some point some kind of obvious like mantra will come out of people that we see over and over again. But yeah, I don't know, we'll wait till a company like Apple has it working and then see what the marketing says for it. We definitely need to move away from this high equals bad equals red metaphor. Every time I give this project or these projects to my students and say, let's design an app for this, first thing I do is like traffic light system. We'll have red for high, green for low. This will be great. And I'm like, no, okay, you've immediately confused the whole situation for everybody. Let's try and stop this. And every time I try and say that to a student, it takes them a decent period of time to rethink the metaphor away from that. But even here, we've got like increasingly dark, increasingly red levels of stress being bad. And I guess that maybe that works for stress, but I'm not sure it will work for high mental workload being good. And so how do we visualize to people that being stuck in a situation is what's unhealthy for them? That's quite a complex thing to be able to visualize in a design or using colors maybe. The other thing is there's the large gap between what's motivating people and what we can really measure. So that whole difference between people saying, I want to reduce my stress levels, and then paper saying, we measure stress. I think they're really not measuring the same thing. And that gap is going to stand out more and more as we start doing it. When your app is saying you're stressed right now and you're going, but I feel great. So figuring out that gap is going to be challenging for us. And then just having conversations with people about this is difficult because every time we start talking to people about mental workloads and we start describing mental workloads, they just start naturally flowing into stress. They start saying the word stress every time we do an interview. And so just conveying to people in the first place about how do they separate those things out is really difficult for us as researchers. And I think people go all the way through a study and still never quite realize that difference. And that's hard for us to gather data about. But overall, I'm saying that we're very interested now in cognitive personal informatics and what all this will be as a research area for the next 5-10 years. And we want to encourage more and more people to get involved in it because I think there's loads of perspectives we're going to need in order to understand it effectively. So for my last couple of minutes, if that's all right, I think I've got enough time. I want to advertise a bit about getting involved in this, if you want to get involved. We had a discussion at CHI 2022, which was the first time I invited people to come and talk to me about it. And one of the things I produced was this diagram to try and articulate where I think we are related to personal informatics more broadly, because things like physical activity has been well researched. I remember back in the 2000s when we were like saying, oh, can a mobile phone accurately track how many steps you're doing while you're walking? And that's now something that's like, completely in the wild happening, and you can determine whether someone's running or walking or skipping quite accurately from your watch. And then we now look at quantified self and personal informatics and how people change their behaviors based on that type of thing. Comparatively, cognitive activity is like right down to the side, where we are still maybe saying, can we detect it happening in a lab? We're not really sure if we can detect it happening in a lab, but at the same time, there are devices that you can buy which say they can do it in your home. The current research right now is really trying to say, can we do mental workload judgments in the wild? I don't know if we totally can. And I think it's going to be like the next 10 to 20 years when we start thinking, well, what parallels are there from personal informatics? And what would be great is if we can try and take things we understand for personal informatics and really bring that down into guiding what we do earlier in cognitive personal informatics. So we're trying to figure out how many people are interested in this, we're trying to gather more than just my research questions, because I bet people have got other ones which are better / different, and it would be better if we address those together as a community and start to pull together an agenda for future workshops that we can get more people involved in. This was the outcome of our SIG, which I won't go through. It's just to show that we did something useful. sort of. But what we've got planned is we've submitted a proposal for a CHI workshop for CHI 2023. So fingers crossed if that comes through, then we'd love, if you're doing anything in this area, for you to contribute your own thoughts to that workshop. I'm planning a special issue for a journal, although Anna wasn't convinced this was a smart workload idea for us. But I think it would be nice to be able to get a space where we could publish a series of articles specifically about this that have got more research behind them in one issue. I'd love to do a little series of blogs, which is an idea I've had but haven't really put to a plan yet, where different people with different perspectives on this can write just like I don't know, a couple of pages on a related series of posts that just talk about cognitive personal informatics from different angles. So I already started talking to someone in America who was something like, oh, this is an interesting like disability, accessibility type area. I'd love to look at this from a perspective of, you know, how do people with different disabilities experience mental workload differently? And is that something that we can identify or use to identify to help people? And for me, that was just like a whole area I hadn't even thought of. So I'd love to see him write about that. If you want to get more involved, we have a Slack, which you totally can join anytime. It's probably Googleable in terms of finding it. But I think these slides are getting maybe shared. I don't know. But you can always message me and I can link you into it. We'd love for you to join in to hear about what we're doing in the future and then start volunteering to write posts, blog posts about it. So join us, basically. If you're excited by cognitive personal informatics, I think the more I talk to different people about different perspectives is really helping me, and I would love to do more of it. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much. This is our little research group in Nottingham, if you want to see the team.
So thank you, Max. Any questions for Max? Yes.
We pass the mic.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Do a running.
A nice microphone. Yeah, so thanks, Max, for the nice presentation. Just one thing to mention is just regarding the term, sort of a misuse of our term in our field, like mental stress and mental workload have been widely used in this field, but in a many different way, right? And the stress is, I mean, I'm always referring to the definition, the definition of each term first made, and stress is definitely about bodily response, according to Hans Selye, who made the term, coined the term early back in 1960s, and he defined the mental stress as a non-specific bodily response of any demand, whilst the mental workload is about cognitive demand of a task, which was also sort of defined, well established in the field, and also research groups from France, Edith Galli, back in 2012, they also sort of defined the term mental workload. So just as mentioned, these two are a little bit different terms and definitely overlapped, but perception of these terms could be affected by many different confounding factors, like education levels and other things. And also, when it comes to mental workload, there are also the cognitive load factors to be considered. Like there are 3 cognitive load factors which have been reported. One is arousal and the time pressure, and also the last bit was the task difficulty. So these factors would also affect, our perception of mental workload. How do you think about, what do you think about these perception issues and how we can sort of control the confounding factors in doing this type of research?
That's a good question. I'll let this guy, he's very kindly, thank you very much for waiting for that. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Especially the difference between the stress being a response to a situation as opposed to the mental workload being like part of the task you're doing. So one thing we've done is we've written a paper where we tried to compare these in particular, and that was where we looked at it quite closely. But yeah, so if you look at some of the models of stress, they have exactly the same things: the demands, the effort you're putting in, the task success, and then they have this response to it as being this thing that separates out as different. And it's really challenging for us to separate when we have discussions with people, because a lot of research, I think, is mixing those up a little bit. And then just individuals, when we're talking to normal end users, they really have a blurred sense of all of it, and they're really motivated by stress. It's such a popular term. So, I mean, it's challenging. There's lots of things we could do to look at what is the kind of work demand or the task demands, which would be handy. Success is a lot harder to judge. And then maybe we can soon measure the mental workload as that middle step, but it will be, for us, it's really interesting to see when we do take measurements or ask people when they feel really good or bad about something. So one of Horia's studies was, sorry to describe it for you. We had people doing air traffic control tasks, and it was like, as you got to like 7, 8, 9 planes, that became high mental workload for people. And some people in the study were kind of like, oh, that was really difficult, really stressful. And like, I was really worried about it. And then they tended to have, we didn't really have any controlled data for this, but we saw them making more mistakes when that was the case, and sometimes high mental workload levels, although what's higher between two people is hard to judge. But then some people were going, oh, that was really good fun. Like, I enjoyed doing that task. And it was definitely a response to the demand. I don't know whether they felt like they had to do well because of the experimenter effect, but it's the thing I want to start doing now is always checking in our studies, you know, how are you feeling right now about this high workload? Have you had a negative response to it or a positive response to it? Also, just making people do high workload is hard. I was saying to someone earlier, we have people who do tasks which are supposed to be high workload, but they're like, doing the task, can I have my £10 now? And then go home. And so trying to get people to actively do a job properly, even just as mental workloads, is increasingly difficult. We tried to replicate a study that they did in America. It was at Tufts University. Was it Tufts? No, it was Rutgers we tried to replicate. And they'd done a study where they had people investigating politics in America as like a difficult learning task. We tried to recreate it in Swansea when I was there. And just the stuff that the data that they reported from the group in America was all really like high performance, well-motivated, people energized. And the people who took part in our study just did not care at all. And it was really interesting for us. We had low effort data and no high mental workload whatsoever, but they had all this kind of behavior data that shows that they took it really seriously in America. So I'm finding this is really hard to control in our studies now. And I'm always trying to check for it.
Thanks, Max.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Making you run to the other side of the room.
This is kind of related, I think. Thank you so much for your presentation, by the way. Really enjoyed it. When you stacked like the intensity of mental workload against valence, positive and negative, so you sort of had intensity of mental workload and then valence on the other side, it made me think of like a lot of emotion research, which like would put arousal there instead. Yeah. I was wondering if you thought of what was the differences you think between arousal and mental workload?
That is a really good question. And I don't have a good answer for you, I'm afraid. I mean, it's part of my wider concern that there's all these people looking at exactly the same thing, but using like massive different words for it.
Instinctively, mental workload sort of implies like a self-directedness, like
True.
you're putting effort into it. But then maybe you would have the effort like trying to just process something as well. And if you're in a high intensity situation with a lot of stimuli.
Yeah. Be interesting to know whether it's a separate factor we should try and estimate, like overall arousal level, and then take that as a factor in the mental workload data. But you're right, it does feel like this mental workload implies chosen effort in response to a task.
Potentially.
Well, it's a good question. I haven't really ever thought of that exact difference before, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
I've got a quick question coming from Kirill online. So this is in relation to what was on slide 33.
33.
Yeah.
This one?
And yeah, I'll just read it out. Presumably high is a normative evaluation, not a calibration of physiological states. What does being right about it mean? Right as in quotes. Presumably many users have a model that there is a separate mind that is correlated with the body. How do you define mental workload or mental work?
That was a complicated question. Wait, can I read it? What does being right about it mean? So I guess there's a separation between whether or not the data says that they have high workload, or they've got a response from physiological data that implies that they're in a high workload situation, but whether they feel like they're in a high workload situation, which is definitely an interesting angle for it. Something that strikes me as being challenging is that all the time when people have got, like, they're trying to do machine learning of physiological data to see if they reach the right state, is they're always taking people's subjective data as the right state and then saying, does the physiological data say the same thing? Which is a massive problem, because you're presuming people's own interpretation of their mental workload level is an accurate label, which is often not the case. And if they are being affected by their stress response to it and they feel like it's high, and that's showing through as more, then the accurate labeling of these things is really difficult. There was a really interesting paper I read, but I mean, I reviewed it, so I don't know if it ever came out, but it was trying to decide which of 3 different approaches was the correct label, whether it was their own response, the body said, or what the task determined it should be for them. And it was very interesting to try and mix up those different types of labels for machine learning. The separation of body and mind is interesting. Sorry?
What was the conclusion that paper said?
I probably shouldn't say it, but it was something I reviewed. But it was just interesting to challenge the assumption that labels from a person are accurate self-assessments, or the way that people make those self-assessments will be increasingly varied. So having that as the ground truth. In fact, Sarah Sharples, who was one of the authors, every time I say we're trying to measure for the ground truth, she's like, oh, never say that. Never say it's the ground truth, because that's just their opinion of the ground truth when you've got the labels. The separation of body and mind is interesting, that sort of question, because it seems pretty clear that physiological responses change quite a lot to cognitive state. Whether some people can control that is a different thing, but it seems like this. Whether or not it means you feel a certain way is different to whether or not your body is showing duress from demand and activity. And that's what I think is being measured rather than how they feel about it.
Thank you. And just a nice comment, Anne Blandford's really nice talk. Thank you. Any other questions?
Sure.
Maybe it's a question. I'm just thinking about when you're talking about the norms for longitudinal tracking, and it seems like the mental workload cycle is, in terms of the dynamics, you could draw parallels to almost like sleep cycles and sleep data and sleep informatics. And
interesting.
I wonder if you think, if you've thought about in terms of the application, because there's not going to be, I guess with sleep, there's like the recommended 7 hours, but the reasons behind that might be because you get X amount of REM and stage 1 and 2, etc. Do you think it will be more of that type of application, like creating a balance of these different cycles over a task or a day?
Yeah, so there'll be a simple rule that sort of normally creates a healthy balance of something else. Yeah, I haven't actually thought about it in sleep cycle terms, but you're right, there's a very big parallel for sleep cycle. I've been wearing the Oura Ring. I don't know if anyone's used that app for the Oura Ring, and it's like tries to show you how you cycle through the different levels of sleep every night. And it always says I get 20 minutes of REM total, so I don't think it's totally correct. At least I hope it's not. But yeah, there is a clear relationship there. And I like the principal example of this getting 7 hours or getting 8 hours as being a thing that will likely invoke a certain number of deep sleep points. Because once people feel like they don't feel healthy, even though they're getting 8, they start to look at why, don't they?
Yeah.
Go into
and then
detail.
you can personalize, right?
Yeah.
You get alarms that wake you up at the right cycle stage, and then you feel way better than you were waking up an hour later.
Yeah, the right point in the cycle. Whether or not you should take breaks when you're naturally physiologically waning. Yeah, very interesting. We can talk more about that. We can slide.
Less of the point about your findings, but more about your practice as a researcher as well. So you have a ring. I can see you also have a smartwatch.
Yeah.
How's working on this affected the interpretation of your own data? And how much skepticism do you bring when you're looking at your own data? And why do you use these?
So the thing I've been doing most of the time is trying to figure out when it's wrong and why it's wrong. So I think that the ring is affected by the movement of my wife in beds. So when either of us moves, it says, oh, you're not asleep, which I think is why it says I'm only getting 4 hours a night, which I hope is not true. But it does, I think it's giving me a kind of healthy criticism or critique of what it's showing me, and then trying to figure out how I decide if I'm doing better based on knowing its default, like, inaccuracies. But I'm a bit worried that people will just not have a place to have that type of thought with mental activity and cognitive activity if they just presume it's, they don't have any other reference point. It could suddenly get very, like, drastic, or the recommendations could be very absolute, when actually they're, a lot more varied.
Cool. Thank you.
I find this easier for sleeping, and I don't like wearing a watch when I'm asleep.
No.
But some of my students are happy tracking their sleep that way.
Interesting.
Cool. Oh, no, there's one.
I wanted to ask about participants and their fears.
Their fears.
Around the data about themselves. I was wondering if you'd like to tap into that a little bit in terms of, so they were saying that they had fear about how this type of data might be used in specific contexts, like, for example, you were mentioning employers might have a particular take on it, which you were illustrating by talking about, making perhaps workplace changes or work pattern changes, something like that. But you also then talked about the kind of moving away from this stress as being bad and the kind of traffic light way of thinking about stress as bad or less bad, or you were talking about it as a good thing. You can learn something about yourself if you're stressed.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had anything more to say about that in terms of education about stress, for example, in workplace. Like, could that catch up before a kind of app gets in there in between? Does that make sense? If I don't know, if an employer has an opportunity to learn about stress as a good thing versus if they have an opportunity to use an app that is not framing stress from this perspective. It's just a thought that I had, but I hope it makes sense.
For me, the welltory app was really interesting when it started trying to educate me about good stress. And that was, for me, I was like, oh, look at this. When I started reading every little bit of it as carefully as possible, I bet loads of people would just be like, yeah. So just an example of that, trying to teach people a bit about whether stress is good or bad was interesting. I feel like there would be a strong reaction against anybody that started when an employer says, no, stress is good. I feel like immediately people are going to have this response, which is already creating a blockage for us in terms of research, which is that their assumption is that, well, having stress or being stressed is bad, which is, I guess, true, but being under a stressed, your body being under stress is being good. So I think the fastest thing to help that would be to separate those out. And I don't know how we do that necessarily, but if a company can separate that out for people, that would be handy. What was interesting in the examples where they were happy to do it, I can't remember if I've got that on there. Yeah, controlled sharing for positive change was an example that they said a few times from our participants, where they said, I'd really like my employer to know that this task they asked me to do is not manageable. So if we can collectively measure 10 people doing it and show that everybody finds this unmanageable in terms of workload, then the employer can change their expectations about people for that. But they didn't want the employer just to take, all of their workload for all the time to do it. But that was a nice example of people trying to take an element of what they were doing that was potentially useful for creating workplace improvements. And they could see it could be good for workplace improvement, even though they're considering that it was high still that was bad, or too high being bad in that case. I think this is why I'm worried about the word stress being used in half of these papers, because it's immediately got a loaded expectation.
Following up on the comment, did you, from the side of the industry, so did they comment on this, on the fear on their side? Because we, in one of the projects we had a few years ago, there was a company involved in our project, but their HR department was kind of scared of how that could be used against the company.
Yeah.
And so did anybody talk about, because I know a lot of companies are interested in this technology, and that was the case, but then there are departments that, you know, they're more related to the law aspect, and they see possible issue with that.
It's definitely the case. You're right. We've only really started talking to companies lately, so we don't quite have the data to give you for that yet. There's a couple of consultants I'm talking to who are trying to take brain measurements into companies as their selling point for their own like financial income. And what's worrying is that companies can take what they think is positive steps for people, and then it comes out really negatively in the news, which I guess is what they were worried about. So there was that one where which company was it that added a little button for every employee where they could say, I'm feeling stressed right now. And then that came out really negatively, I think, in the press, despite them trying to do something which they thought would be helpful for people. What I'd like to do is talk to the people who are in that company where they've got the brain scanner or the EEG chip inside the helmets to see how employees feel about that, because the company itself has a very positive marketing, or positive outcome from that they describe. But presumably the employees feel a bit like observed. I don't know what the right word for it is. Yeah. But I don't have access to those people to talk to right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Shipping, for hosting. So Jeremy and Leah, so we're the new seminar hosts. Hope you enjoyed today. And we'll take over this role. I want to say thank you to Anisha, Delisha, and Temi, the outgoing host. Thank you so much for your help. Looking forward, we're going to be sharing, hopefully next week, get out there to start thinking about who new to invite for the coming year. If you've got any other thoughts or suggestions for how we can improve this, do get in touch with us. And we're going to have some cookies and thing, and then we'll go to the resting hair at 4:30. There's also a dinner tonight as well, and if you want to talk to Delisha about that, if there's still potentially options to join that. But anyway, hope you have a great time. Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you.